You stand at the threshold of morning, the air cool against your face, the world still soft with possibility. In the palm of your hand a plain paper lies folded, nothing more than numbers and names, a bank statement or a whispered promise, but when you lift it, the silence answers with a voice that is both tender and exact. It is not the clamor of ambition, nor the rustle of envy, it is a quiet summons. I am calling you, it seems to say, to more than comfort. To purpose. The words arrive like sunlight through a narrow window, illuminating a dust mote, a child's drawing on the kitchen table, the boxes marked someday. You feel a tug at the roots of your life, gentle and undeniable. Around you, ordinary details take on new meaning, the worn couch becomes a place where decisions shape a family's future, the ledger on your desk becomes a map of potential generosity. You recognize the invitation, prosperity not for trophies but for stewardship, not for consumption but for service. The possibility hums, what would it look like to steward money as sacred soil, to plant not just for tomorrow but for legacy? And yet, along with the tender conviction comes a tightening in your chest. Responsibility is a weight you did not request. Fear rises, an old story resurfacing, scarcity whispered by childhood dinners missed, by loans signed in haste, by cautionary advice that taught you to hold on. You remember voices that said, better safe than sorry, and now they stand at the door with their arms folded. What if abundance demands courage you don't have? What if the call requires risk, and risk means failing those you love? In that pause between promise and step you are both vulnerable and ripe. The camera of your mind shifts from close-ups of doubt to wide angles of possibility, a community fed, a child educated, a ministry sustained. The pull intensifies. This is not a tidy assurance but an invitation to grow into responsibility. If that whisper is stirring something inside you, curiosity, longing, a holy discomfort, stay with me. There is practical wisdom and spiritual clarity ahead to help you move from fear to faithful action. But first, the doubts will speak louder, testing whether this call is real or merely hope. The kitchen light hums low as you sit with the stack of envelopes, the names of your family printed in the quiet weight of each one. Outside, rain drums a steady rhythm against the window, an honest metronome that matches your pulse. You whisper a prayer and hear, beneath it, that same invitation, not comfort, but calling. Your mind offers the usual litany, old scarcity stories learned at your mother's elbow, the accountant's cold voice, the friend who warns that ambition will cost you your peace. The fear rises like tidewater, curling around your ankles. A knock at the door brings Tom, the older man from church who always smells faintly of cedar and calm. He sits without ceremony, spreads a folded spreadsheet on the table and says, simply, show me the truth you're living by. His question is soft, but it cuts through the noise. You explain the numbers, the dreams, the shame. He listens, then leans back and tells a story about a drought and a farmer who saved one seed. You don't prove faith by throwing everything to wind, Tom says. You prove it by stewarding what you have and planting where you're meant to grow. That counsel lights a small, stubborn fire. You begin to test what stewardship looks like, a budget drawn like a map, the discipline of naming every dollar, a deliberate margin for giving that makes your chest tighten with both loss and wonder. You meet resistance, temptation to hoard, to hide, to shrink, but you also feel an unexpected steadiness. Investing becomes less like gambling and more like placing a plank across a ravine, built slowly and well. You have a frank conversation with your partner at the worn kitchen table. If we do this, we may be uncomfortable for a season, you say. They take your hand and answer, I want our life to mean something more than comfort. In quiet moments you return to prayer and a verse comes with clarity, responsibility is part of calling. The idea of prosperity shifts under your feet from trophy to tool. Each small choice, paying down debt, automating savings, giving sacrificially, reshapes how you move through the world. Fear doesn't vanish, but it becomes a companion rather than a jailer. If this scene touches something inside you, like this video to hold that spark, subscribe and ring the bell to continue walking this path together. With a plan and trembling courage, you step toward the first real test of faith, and the next decision will demand more than good intentions. You sit at the kitchen table as dusk slides in through the blinds, the soft yellow of a single lamp cutting a private circle of light. Paper spreads like a small landscape before you: bills, a half-finished budget, the investment brochure you promised you'd read. Your chest tightens in a way you haven't felt since a different kind of risk: love, a move, a brave confession. A whisper that felt like God's call now returns as a question: can I steward this call? Fear answers with old stories, scarcity memories learned at your mother's knee, the emergency that once swallowed your savings, the nights you counted coins. The voice of doubt is loud, practical, relentless: what if you fail? What if abundance changes you? A knock at the door pulls you back. Your friend and mentor, a steady presence, slips into a chair across from you. Start with what you control, she says, opening a worn notebook of her own. Budget the truth. Name your values. Give first, even if small. Faith isn't reckless, it's disciplined. Her words are practical and soft, a balm and a map. Together you sketch a plan, a realistic budget that honors needs and future giving, a tiny emergency fund that breathes room into decision-making, a modest investment strategy that grows rather than gambles. You argue, you cry, you laugh at how small courage can look: automatic transfers, a monthly giving pledge, a meeting with a financial advisor. At night you kneel, not out of ritual but from the weight of the choice. Teach me to steward, you whisper. The silence answers with patience. You remember scriptures and promises that tied prosperity to purpose, and something shifts. Money is no longer only a threat but a tool, capable of caring for your family, of freeing your attention for service, of sowing seeds into your calling. Risk remains. There are setbacks, a delayed paycheck, an unexpected repair. But each disciplined choice, saying no to the impulsive purchase, choosing a conservative fund, directing a percentage to those in need, reshapes your inner ledger. Scarcity softens. Courage begins to feel like habit. You sense the turning point ahead, where small faith-driven acts compound into real capacity, and the call you once feared becomes a path you can walk. The next step will ask you to answer more boldly, to let that capacity become a legacy. The kitchen light hummed as you sorted through envelopes, each one a small accusation: rent, school, repairs, the list that never ends. Outside, the night was quiet, but inside your chest a different sound: the low, persistent voice of something larger, a whisper that had become a summons. You remembered the first nudge, not a promise of easy wealth, but an invitation to use money differently, to let it serve a calling. Still, the old stories crowded in. There won't be enough, one voice insisted. You can't risk this, another warned. You rise and pace, hands on the back of a chair, and the scene shifts: a cafe the next morning, sunlight through steam, a mentor across from you with the kind of eyes that have seen both loss and redemption. Fear will always give you reasons to stay small, they say, stirring their coffee. Faith gives you reasons to steward. Start where you are. Their words are simple, but they land like stones forming a bridge. They teach you to name the stories: scarcity, shame, inherited fear, and to test them with small, clear actions. The first test is practical: a budget drawn on the back of a receipt, not as punishment but as promise. You automate a small transfer to savings, then to an investment account, then set aside a portion for giving, not because you have to, but because it rewires your purpose. The first time you click transfer your palms sweat, but afterward there is an odd relief, like stepping into a room with the lights finally on. You also learn the language of wise risk: diversified choices, emergency cushions, patient compounding. You practice saying no to the impulse that used to quiet your doubt and yes to discipline that answers the whisper. There are setbacks, a late bill, a market dip, and the inner critic cheers them like proof. But alongside those moments, there are experiments that succeed: a modest investment that grows, a gift that opens a door, a conversation with your partner that replaces secret anxiety with shared strategy. Each small win reshapes the story from just surviving to faithful stewardship. If this resonates, if you want practical steps that honor both your calling and your household, like this message, it helps this work reach others, and subscribe with the bell to walk the next steps together. Next, we'll map the first disciplined practices you'll use in the coming 90 days, so the whisper becomes a steady, guiding voice. The weeks that follow feel like a classroom of the soul. You sit at the kitchen table under the tired light of a single lamp, a cup of coffee gone cold, the house breathing quietly around you. Paper and phone glow with numbers that used to mean only worry, now they begin to mean decisions. A friend from church, an older sister in faith, slides into the chair across from you and says, softly, "Tell me the faith behind these numbers." Her question is not judgment but a mirror. You find yourself saying things you haven't admitted even to yourself. I'm afraid to lose what little I have. I'm ashamed of what I don't know. I want to honor God, but I don't know how money fits into that. The guidance you receive is practical and spiritual, braided together. Begin with a map, she says, handing you a simple ledger she still uses. Name every inflow and outflow. Give every dollar a job. Later, kneeling in the dim of your bedroom, you speak aloud the same prayer your mentor taught, Lord, show me where to be brave and where to be patient. The whisper that answers isn't a thunderclap, it's a steadying hand at the small of your back. Courage grows not by denial of fear, but by moving with fear at your side. You test the waters. You set a modest budget, open a savings account titled for a purpose, and make a tiny investment, something more symbolic than profitable at first, so that your money begins to work with intention. Each small act stretches you. The discipline of tracking turns thoughtless spending into choices. The discipline of tithing breaks the tight fist of scarcity. The discipline of seeking counsel keeps pride from steering. There are hard nights when the old stories return, whispering scarcity, worthlessness, and risk. You remember a line from a mentor, ambition without alignment is noise. Alignment without action is prayer without feet. You balance ambition with calling, measuring each opportunity against the impact it could seed. A neighbor's education fund, a community pantry, a chance to mentor someone younger, these possibilities begin to reshape what abundance could be for you. If you want the practical templates, prayers, and step-by-step habits that helped reshape this journey, like this video and subscribe with the bell so you won't miss the next lesson. Ahead lies a test that will ask you to move from preparation to bold obedience, and everything will hinge on the choice you make next. Morning light slipped through the blinds as you sat at the kitchen table, bills spread like a small map of obligations and opportunities. The silence was thick with the question that had been following you, can I be trusted with more? Your hand hovered over a pen, the numbers on the page were honest and unforgiving. A whisper rose again, gentle and insistently kind, God's invitation, not to luxury, but to purpose. You breathed, and the old stories of lack rose up, you don't deserve this. You'll mess it up. The voice was familiar, a worn recording from years of scarcity. Then a different voice, steadier, pushed back, what if faith is a skill you learn? What if stewardship is practice? You called a friend who had walked this path and met them at a small cafe 2 blocks over. Steam curled from the coffee mug, outside, people hurried to jobs that supported their lives. Start small, they said, sliding a simple spreadsheet across the table. Budget your wants, honor your needs, give first. You're not gambling on yourself, you're investing in the calling you've been given. Their eyes were clear, not judgmental. And when fear shows up, name it. Speak to it the same way you speak to a child learning to walk. Back home, you laid out envelopes, one for essentials, one for savings, one for investment, one for giving. The tactile act of placing cash into a labeled envelope felt sacramental. The numbers didn't change overnight, but your posture did. You practiced saying aloud, this is not mine alone, I steward it for others. You made a list of tiny, practical risks, automate a small monthly transfer to an index fund, cut one recurring expense, mentor a neighbor with your time. Each was a test that asked for courage and consistency rather than bravado. An evening call with your partner sharpened the resolve. If we steward well, our children inherit a legacy of purpose, not anxiety, they said. The room glowed with lamplight, and you both laughed at the awkwardness of faith meets finance. Fear didn't vanish, but it shrank when faced with measures, counsel, prayer, and disciplined action. You felt momentum stirring, the first deliberate steps toward sustainable abundance. And just as the first green shoots appear under the soil, a new opportunity was about to knock, asking you to decide whether to step through. The night finds you at the kitchen table again, two lamps throwing warm circles over bank statements and a child's crayon drawing tacked to the fridge. Outside the house, the street is quiet, but inside your chest the old scarcity stories drum like rain on a tin roof. What if you fail? What if more brings more responsibility than you can bear? You breathe into the questions and, slowly, a second voice answers, not an abstract promise, but a steady whisper, I am calling you to provide, to steward, to serve. The whisper isn't a command without care, it arrives with clarity and a patience that slows your pulse. A mentor you trust sits across from you in that glow, hands folded like a bridge. Tell me what scares you, they say simply. You admit it, fear of losing yourself, of making promises you can't keep, of becoming driven by numbers instead of by people. They nod, then slide a small, dog-eared ledger toward you. Treat money like a language you can learn, they say. Start with a vocabulary, budget, margin, investment, giving. Speak them daily until fear stops translating everything into lack. You try. The first budget is crude, the lines uneasy, but each column is a choice declared aloud. When you label a percentage for generosity, your throat tightens and then, unexpectedly, relaxes. The act of giving becomes a hinge, it swings open a window toward trust. You call an advisor you respect and, in the cadence of honest questions, discover practical steps you can take this month. Automate a savings plan, diversify a small investment, set a giving goal aligned with your values. Each step is not a sprint but a rehearsal in faith. There are missteps. A failed investment feels personal, an impulse purchase stings. Yet even these moments teach stewardship. You return to the ledger, adjust the margins, admit the error aloud. A neighbor's gratitude after you cover a need with intentional funds reframes success, not as accumulation, but as capacity to bless. Dawn finds you at the same table, but your hands move with a new steadiness. Courage is not absence of fear, it is a series of disciplined choices that bend your relationship with money toward purpose. You stand ready to test this on a larger stage, the next decision waiting like a door ajar. What will you open when the opportunity knocks? You wake before dawn, the house still breathing in the soft hush between sleep and sunrise. The kitchen table is scattered with receipts, a ledger app glowing on your phone, a small Bible or journal folded beside a cup of coffee gone cold. Outside, the world is already stirring, but here, in this quiet, the whisper that began as a nudge has settled into something steadier, a calling that asks for more than good intentions. This is not about accumulation, you say aloud, as if reminding yourself. It's about capacity to serve. A mentor's voice returns to you, practical and tender, treat money like soil. You cultivate it. You don't worship the harvest. You imagine her smile as you move numbers, reallocating a line from impulse to investment, setting aside a gift for someone you don't even know yet. The fear that clung to you earlier, the old stories of scarcity, rises for a moment, a shadow at the edge. You breathe, fold your hands, and answer with small acts of discipline, a budget that honors needs and dreams, an automated transfer to savings, a first, awkward online donation to a cause that makes your chest tighten in the best way. The scenes that follow are cinematic in their ordinariness, you sitting with an advisor who listens more than talks, a handshake with a small business owner whose hope mirrors yours, the ache in a child's face when you explain why you can't buy everything and the quiet pride when you say yes to a lesson. There are nights when doubt flares, what if the risk breaks us? And mornings when a ledger line becomes proof that steady choices compound into possibility. You learn the language of stewardship, margins, diversification, generosity, covenant. You test each word against prayer and common sense. You give not to be seen but to be real, and in giving you discover currency is also courage. The journey reshapes you, ambition bends toward service, and every disciplined step becomes an act of worship. If this resonance moves you, if it sparks a trembling hope, stay with this walk, like this message as a small promise of change, subscribe and ring the bell so you won't miss the next step. Ahead, the path demands a bolder decision, one that will either confirm your course or force you to surrender more than money. You sit at the same kitchen table where fear once lived, tonight the lamp paints warm circles on a stack of bills and a battered notebook of plans. Outside, the street is still, but inside your chest there is a new rhythm, one made of intention, not panic. You whisper, "What if I fail?" And a calmer voice answers, whether from a friend, a pastor, or the steady pulse of conviction, "What if you steward well and see what grows?" The doubt doesn't vanish, but it shrinks around the concrete actions you begin to take. A mentor leans in across your screen, not judging, only mapping. Start with truth. Name where every dollar goes. Give first, even if small. Automate generosity. Build margin before you expand. You try it, one envelope for savings, one for tithing, one for investment, simple, almost clumsy, like learning to walk. The first 2 weeks are a test of will. You miss a few comforts, but you also feel something else, the surprising lift of purposeful restraint. Each time you choose discipline over impulse, you say yes to a promise larger than comfort. On a gray morning you call your financial counselor. "I'm scared," you admit. The counselor smiles through the crackling line. Courage is not the absence of fear, it's the habit of moving forward anyway. Will design for your life, not someone else's spreadsheet. Together you set a modest investment plan, one that won't make headlines but will compound with patience. You give your first intentional gift, an honest, trembling offering to a cause that matters. The gesture grounds you. It rewires what money means. Months pass and small victories arrive like sunlight, a debt reduced, an emergency fund born, a neighbor helped without strain. Your ambitions align with a calling that feels less like climbing and more like building. Each practical choice, budget, invest, give, repeats an inner promise, "I will steward what I'm given." In those quiet, ordinary acts you begin to hear God's voice not as a loud command but as a steady invitation to faithful abundance. If this movement inside you resonates, hold it for a moment, like this message and subscribe so you can return when courage needs a reminder. Next, you will watch how this budding stewardship becomes sustainable abundance that shapes not just your life, but the legacy you leave. Morning light spills across the kitchen table where you spread the months of ledgers like sails catching wind. The coffee is half forgotten, steam folding into the quiet as numbers begin to tell a new story. A mortgage chipped away faster than old fear predicted, an emergency fund bulging where scarcity once lived, a small reserve for the vulnerable neighbor who knocks at your door. You remember the whisper that started this, God's hush that felt like an invitation rather than a command, and now you see evidence that invitation was also a strategy. Across the room, your partner watches with a smile you didn't earn with bravado but with steady choices, a budget that became a boundary, scheduled giving that became a discipline, investments that are patient and principled. We did this together, they say, and you realize stewardship has softened your edges. It's no longer about impressing anyone, it's about preserving and multiplying what serves people and purpose. You hear the echo of your mentor's voice, calm and unhurried. Prosperity doesn't baptize your pride, it purifies your priorities. You walk outside into a neighborhood humming with small victories. A new sign hangs above the bakery you helped fund, local jobs, fair wages, something practical and sacred at once. A child runs past with a scholarship envelope clutched in hand because you chose to give with intent. The feeling that rises is not triumph but a quiet wonder, a realization that money, rightly stewarded, extends the reach of your calling. Fear still tugs, the old stories whisper that abundance will change you, but each act of disciplined generosity nudges those voices quieter. Courage becomes habit. A soft, inward conversation with God settles you. Where will you lead me next? No thunder answers, only a steady nudge toward sustainable influence, legacy that feeds soul as much as stomach. You promise yourself to protect the ground you've gained, counsel, accountability, clarity of purpose. If this moment resonates, if you feel that sacred nudge too, let that feeling be seen, press like, subscribe and ring the bell so the next step arrives when you are ready. In the next moment we'll trace the daily disciplines and spiritual practices that keep abundance both faithful and fruitful. You stand in the doorway of a new morning, sunlight touching the edges of a kitchen table where bills once gathered like small storms. The house is quiet except for the soft rhythm of a life settling into steadier hands. You remember the whisper that began all of this, a summons not to comfort alone but to a wider financial purpose, and you feel how that tender voice has become a steady compass. It led you through the fear, through the accounting of old stories, through the hard lessons of stewardship, and now it arrives at something clearer: abundance as service. In the scenes that follow inside your mind, you see the transformation. There is a table where your children learn about giving before they learn about spending, a neighbor receiving help because you chose to multiply your resources, a small business that took root because you invested with intention. These are not grand trophies but quiet monuments of alignment, ambition guided by calling, money shaped into legacy. You recall late nights with a mentor, the spreadsheets and prayer, the breath you took before a bold step, each one a stitch in a new garment of identity: steward, not consumer. Listen to the gentle dialogue you now have with God and with yourself. Keep tending what I've given you, he says. Use it to grow more life. You answer with discipline, budgeting, learning, giving, and with courage that has become routine. Prosperity no longer feels like a test to hoard but a tool to multiply blessing. The fear that once tightened your chest has softened into respect for responsibility. If this journey moved you, promise yourself one small act today: a commitment to learn one financial principle, to give a little, to seek wise counsel. If this message touched you, tap the heart of it, show an emotional like so this work continues. Join this small community of doers, subscribe and ring the bell to be reminded when the next step appears. Where will you let this whisper of God lead you next, and to what level are you being called?